This content is brought to you by Algorand, which is building the future of finance. Algorand is one of the leading projects in the crypto industry. It is getting significant adoption and investments. This content is also brought to you by TaxBit, which is the leading tax service provider in the crypto industry. I'm personally a TaxBit user. It makes it so easy to plug in my exchange accounts and calculate my crypto gains and losses. So if you'd like to learn more about Algorand and TaxBit, please visit the links in the description of the podcast and YouTube video. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Ron Hammond, who's the Director of Government Relations at the Blockchain Association. Ron, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Ron, you've got your ear to the ground on what's happening in Washington, D.C. as it relates to crypto. Tell us what's the latest, what's happening. It seems like the stablecoin hearing on Tuesdays is the big news. Can you tell us what took place there and what were some outcomes?
Yeah, of course. So for those who may not be aware, on Tuesday of this week, there was a hearing in the Senate Banking Committee on the PWG report. That's the Presidential Working Group recommendations on basically how to regulate stablecoins. And so the report covered a bunch of issues, highlighted a bunch of risks in stablecoins that are largely agreed upon in terms of bank runs, making sure that they're actually pegged one for the dollar, issues such as that. Now there are some disagreements though that the industry representatives like ourselves have with the report. Most notably being that only banks can issue stablecoins. We believe that there should be a realm that there's more competition and we think it's healthier. Plus also, if you're not doing the traditional banking activities, it probably makes sense that you shouldn't have to apply for this really strict charter. And so that's some differences right now. We see a little bit more of the Republican side of the aisle embracing the idea that not only banks can issue stablecoins, whereas more the Democrats who skew a little older tend to embrace the idea that banks should be the ones only to issue this. And so right now we're kind of in a lobbying battle right now between the banks and the crypto industry. And the hearing was the second hearing on stablecoins. It was one in the House the week beforehand. And it was basically just covering the report and idea of what legislation would look like to regulate stablecoins. Because one major takeaway in that report was that Congress, not the regulators, have a role here to write legislation to regulate stablecoins. And so that's really important. Congress seems very eager, at least, to want to work on something on stablecoin legislation. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that stablecoin legislation is actively moving on Capitol Hill. And in the 5 years I've worked here, I've never seen anything like it with this speed. So there's actually a chance that this bill could move both either in the House or the Senate. So some people to look at right now is Senator Toomey, and he actually announced at the hearing that he's working on a bill right now, and we're in active conversation with his staff. They're great over there. Senator Toomey is the Republican from the Senate Banking Committee. He's the ranking member, the most senior Republican, even though they're not in the majority. And so right now he's looking at some legislation to make sure that both banks and non-banks can issue stable coins, but making sure there's like a charter process potentially involved. And so he teased that in the hearing, and that was really awesome to see that he was publicly putting that out there as a marker. On the other end, though, we do have some detractors in the Senate. Most notably is Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, the progressive out there. Now, her line of questioning wasn't as direct, but it's definitely more tailored that stable coins should not exist and that there should be more of a central bank digital currency approach. So it's interesting to see what the divide is right now. But as we see in the House, which skews a little bit younger in terms of age, a lot of the younger Democrats are now realizing and embracing crypto as a policy. And that's been really exciting to see this bipartisanship form. So I'm very confident we'll get to that point in the Senate. But right now, this is the issue that's moving fast, stable coins. And there is still a little bit of some partisan divide, but I will say that they have some common ground like audits and reserves of stable coin that both sides can definitely agree on.
What's interesting is the folks who are saying that banks should be the only ones to issue stable coins, but there's stable coins already in the market and they're in the billions and combined in a trillion. So what are they thinking they're going to do if they, let's say it were to go that direction, that only banks can issue? What's going to happen to USDC and Tether and so forth?
Correct. And so Circle right now is actively applying for a bank charter. And so we'll see how that process works out. But they're even advocating for, look, we actually believe that there should be more competition. So they're open to having both non-banks issue stable coins. And so they think that's healthier for the market. one thing that was highlighted by Nellie Yang, who's the witness for the presidential working group, basically the representative at the hearing, she did note that if the United States were not to act on legislation or to put too stringent of regulation in place around stablecoins, they would leave the United States. And that would be detrimental to the United States position as a leader in tech and finance. And so we want to make sure the innovation happens here. We want to make sure that the financial system is still sound. Tether has been a popular stablecoin to hit on recently on Capitol Hill from both Republicans and Democrats. And they have been subject to enforcement actions as well. So I think that both sides of the aisle are definitely going to be agreeing on the reserves of stable coins being cash equivalents, short-term treasuries, probably not commercial paper in their reserves, but I know Tether has some of that, but USDC does not. And then also having regular audits to make sure that that backing is one-to-one, as you say it is, because as we saw with Tether, it wasn't the case, and they rightfully got dinged for it. So we'll see. Those are the two commonality trends that both sides can agree on, but the calendar year legislatively is pretty short given the election year. So it's going to be a rush to the finish to see if we can get some legislation passed. But I can say right now, there's several bills in the works and several that will be announced soon on this front. And we'll see if there's a meeting of the minds from both sides of the aisle.
For sure. And there was a specific bill by Representative Josh Gotteimer, who's a Democrat. So that was a good sign to see a Democrat put forth a bill that is pro-innovation and has a balance to it.
Definitely. And I think it's balance is the best way to describe it. There's some elements of the bill that Jake Chervinsky, our head of policy, highlighted that were a little shortcoming. But one of the biggest takeaways is that he also believes that non-banks should issue stablecoins. And I think that's really important. And also it shows to the presidential working group, as well as to leaders in the Democrat Party, that they're not all aligned on this issue. There's actually a little split in between their own membership. And it's definitely, again, it's a lot more the younger Democrats like Richie Torres from New York, Jake Auchincloss from Massachusetts, Sylvia Garcia from Texas that are saying, we are Democrats. We actually disagree with the administration. We actually think that non-banks should be the ones who also issue stable coins. And that number is growing by the day. So hopefully we'll have a good consensus on that issue. But it's definitely, like I keep mentioning multiple times, there's going to be a lot more bills introduced soon. Josh Gotteimer is a great balanced approach. I think we're going to see some legislation coming out from both Republicans and Democrats in the House, as well as in the Senate. So stay tuned for the next couple of weeks. It's going to be pretty busy.
So speaking of the next couple of weeks, there's reports that next week, the President Biden could issue an executive order around crypto regulations. But it seems like there was some rebuttal on that from the White House saying that is not actually true. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, at least in our conversations with the Biden administration and the White House, everyone's hyper-focused on Ukraine, and rightfully so. And typically whenever there's these big events, it takes up nearly all the bandwidth of the staff. And so while they have said that they're working on an executive order and we kind of understand what it's generally going to be about, it seems like it's going to be probably delayed until the situation calms down with Ukraine, because it doesn't make sense to take up staff time when there's such an imminent threat happening. And again, I will reiterate, as I did in my last video, that we believe from our conversation, these are mostly focused on studies from executive agencies as well as other agencies. Some may be familiar with the general public, some may not. And they have a different variety of roles. It would be identifying ransomware, scams, fraud. But again, they're all studies. They're still pretty high level. Most of the agencies are already doing this right now and already conducting studies, but this is just the affirmation that the administration wants to be on the same page and bring all the agencies together to work together and coordinate. Because they all are, for the most part, independent, so they have their own operating procedures and such. So I wouldn't be too concerned between all the FUD that's out there. This is not as big of an impact as a lot of folks say it is on Twitter.
Got it. I appreciate you clarifying that. And to your point, like a lot of these agencies are already doing their thing, but it would be good to hear from the president that he's saying, hey, let's work together, figure this out. And that it's not a ban and it's not some heavy-handed thing coming down on us.
Nothing like that.
Okay, good. Next item I wanted to ask you about was your former boss, Congressman Warren Davidson. he issued a respective a bill, a crypto wallet bill. If I think it's called Keep Your Coin Act, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us?
Correct. The KYC Keep Your Coin Act. There was a little play on words there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, quickly. It's a great privacy bill, especially considering what's happening right now in Canada, and that's was the main impetus of this bill. Even though it's been in the works for months, and I've been working with their policy staff from Tim Hyde over there. He's been a great guy. But he's been working on this bill for quite some time. But given the situation that the Canadian truckers being shut off from their banking services, and Congressman Davidson, and as I've worked with him for several years, I understand personally, he's very much an advocate of the Fourth Amendment, and also making sure that people have access to their finances, and they can't be shut off for their political views, and whether it be something that he supports or something that he's completely against. But the idea that there's no centralized entity that can shut off or choke hold your own wealth is terrifying. So that's what's behind the Keep Your Coins Act, more in regards to self-hosted wallets. So it's a really important bill. I hope we can make sure we use as a marker to Treasury and other agencies to make sure that we preserve privacy, especially with crypto, because cash has a really unique ability to be very private in transactions. But if everything's recorded on a blockchain, there's definitely could be a situation where folks can have their accounts viewed, or their privacy, I would say, be spied on, probably the best way to put it, at least as a CBDC and such. That's a main concern from Republicans. So there's a huge privacy concern. Warren Davidson's a huge privacy hawk, and I think it's an important piece of legislation right now. So we'll see if it goes anywhere, but especially with the self-hosted wallet rule that came out with Treasury a couple of months back with the Trump administration towards the end. It's a very important bill to have as a marker, so that Republicans disagree with that position.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly appreciate him for putting this together, because certainly a huge concern, as you mentioned, the privacy aspect and our civil rights in the Constitution. Next item I wanted to ask you about is Chair Gensler of the SEC responding to Congressman Tom Emmer's questions about a Bitcoin spot ETF. Essentially, why hasn't the SEC approved a Bitcoin spot ETF? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the letter was pretty much, Gary Gensler has a good strategy where he does not really say anything new. And he sticks to the script. And trust me, we've tried. We've tried to get ways to at least have questions positioned in such a way at hearings to get some new intel, or at least to see how he's viewing a certain situation. But much like the hearing, he really didn't talk much about the Bitcoin spot ETF. The same thing happened in the letter. He pretty much described the situation. It says that there's both sides, or concerns from both sides, and we'll take it under further consideration. So it's a classic kind of DC play where you just got to take up the page and state the issue, but not really state a position, and that's pretty much what happened there. So it's very, very standard, no response. Unfortunately, I think this is going to be the state of play with the Bitcoin spot ETF unless something changes. But one thing that is important to highlight, though, is that Tom Emmer is the ranking member, so the most senior Republican for the Oversight Subcommittee, and that is the subcommittee that oversees the SEC. It's more than likely the Republicans will take back the House in November, probably not the Senate, but they're going to definitely take back the House, it looks like. So Tom Emmer is going to be the guy who's going to be overseeing the SEC in Congress. And the major question is, this is a guy, as if you're Chair Gensler, you probably don't want to make him angry, and vice versa. So this is going to be a very interesting dynamic, and to take such a tone with Representative Emmer is definitely striking. I think we're going to see a lot more similar letters from Representative Emmer on the situation, but I would not expect much from Chair Gensler anytime soon.
That's unfortunate. Final item here. You had tweeted regarding El Salvador's President Bukele, his response to a study bill regarding El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin. He seemed to have maybe a knee-jerk reaction to it, saying that the U.S. is trying to do something. Tell us about your thoughts and what you think about the entire situation.
Yeah, of course. So it helps out when I'm also roommates with one of the staffers who's behind the legislation. So it does. This is the upside of DC here, is I know behind the scenes what's happening. So the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Menendez from New Jersey, has been getting a lot more involved in cryptocurrency, but more from the purview of Senate Foreign Relations. And so the idea of, look, how can it help out with aid? How can it help out with ransomware, how can it help with illicit finance? There's some positives here and there's some negatives. What's the benefits here? So they're just in that early phase of how it affects certain sectors. And so one of them is monetary policy. And the IMF has decreed that there is some trouble with El Salvador having Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And so what we're seeing, illegal tender, my apologies. And so this study bill, very, very simple, was pretty much just analyzing this. And study bills, for the most part, in Congress don't go anywhere, or if they do, they just get lumped into some pretty easy bills and move on through Congress. So they are easy bills to pass, and that's why the knee-jerk reaction can almost accelerate that, because a study bill is pretty harmless. And so if someone's trying to rally the troops for a study bill, that can even spur the members of Congress or staffers to say, well, maybe this is something we should look at because this guy is telling us not to look this direction. So I think it's almost counterintuitive to have that kind of a tweet out there, because it actually might encourage the bill to move forward. But I can say that for sure, expect more bills to come from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that are very much similar to this kind of style, studying elements of what a CBDC is, studying elements of what crypto can do for USAID, what it can do for ransomware. So positive and negative studies, but the chances of them moving are pretty slim. I think, like I mentioned, executive orders from them probably solve a lot of those issues because they're doing pretty much the exact same thing.
That absolutely makes sense. Ron, always great chatting with you. You just have a little insightful information of what's happening in DC, and obviously we're going to be doing more of these in over the weeks to catch up and get a pulse on crypto regulations and things along those lines. So thank you for joining me today.
Of course, anytime. Really appreciate it.